Welcome back, everybody. In this video, I'm going to give you 3 fantastic tips to help you improve the way that you study your openings. I personally use each and every one of these, and they have all helped me learn how to pinpoint my weaknesses in my openings so that I can improve upon them. They've helped me learn how to punish my opponent's mistakes in the opening and also just make me much more efficient when I'm studying. So let's jump into it. Before I jump into the first tip, we have to accept one specific thing about studying the openings, and that is you will not be able to study every variation of every opening you play. There are always going to be surprises. There are too many variations out there, and you cannot study everything. So, with that in mind, we have to be very efficient about how we study openings, and we need to know what to prioritize so that we can use our time very well. With that in mind, now let's get into the first tip. My first tip for you to improve how you study openings is to start using Opening Explorer to find your weaknesses in the openings that you play in your own games and start to learn from them, figure out what you're doing wrong. So you can find it very easily. Just look up chess.com, Opening Explorer. It'll come up immediately. And what you'll have here is on the right-hand side, you'll see we've got master games. You can select whether you want to look at it from white or black's perspective, and you'll have the most common moves here along with the outcome percentages. Did white win? Was it a draw? Or did black win? So what I want you to do is hover over master games, click that, and there's going to be a drop down that for whatever reason you can't see right now, and select my games. When you go to my games, now you're looking at your own games, you're looking at the openings that you played and the moves that your opponents played in response. So what we're going to do is start to use the percentage outcomes to figure out where we're making mistakes. So this process is going to look something like this. So I've pulled up my own games here. We have the black pieces, so we're playing with the black pieces. And let's start to look. So we have all of white's first moves. Let's look at e4. My most common response is c6, the caro-kann. So let's imagine we want to improve on the caro-kann, figure out what we're doing wrong. So I can see that the top 3 moves, knight f3, d4, knight c3, we're actually doing very well. We're winning more frequently than we're losing. But if we go down a little bit further, we see that c4, when our opponent plays c4, we lose 64% of the time. So let's look into that. Let's dive in and see what we're doing wrong. So after c4, we play d5. After the pawn takes, we recapture in the center. And after the recapture, we usually play queen takes d5. So this is all the theory that I've always played. This is what I've always done. But if we jump over to the master games, and let's go down this same line, we can start to figure out where our mistake is. So let's run down this same line to see what masters are doing differently so we can actually learn and stop making this mistake. So after e4, we play c6, caro-kann, c4, we play d5, and after c takes, we recapture. And once e takes d5, we can see that the top move here is not queen takes d5, it's actually knight f6. This is the move that is the most commonly played by masters. It's also the one, if you look at the win percentages, that gives black, us, the best chance of winning. So we want to play knight f6 so that we can capture this pawn with the knight instead of the queen. When we play queen takes d5, that will run into knight c3, which hits our queen. Now we lose a tempo in the opening. Just like that, we can learn from the masters by looking at our own games first, finding variations in the openings that we play that cause us a lot of trouble, looking for the variations where we are losing a lot more frequently than we should be, then jumping back into the master games to see how the masters play that opening differently. You're probably playing some move that is incorrect. If we jump into the master games, we can figure out what move that is, and we can figure out what to play instead. So this is a fantastic way to learn from players who are much, much more experienced than we are. The second tip I have for you, and this one is actually my favorite. It has saved me so much time when I study openings. The second tip is to force transpositions so that you can limit the amount of theory you have to study. What I mean is find positions that can be reached through multiple different move orders. When you can do this, you can force your opponent, irregardless of which variation they play, you force them into that position that you know, and then from there you only have to study one actual line of theory. So this is going to be awesome. So let me show you an example of this. Let's say we have the black pieces here and we're playing the Sicilian. So e4, we play c5. And let's look at this first variation. So I'll show you this variation, the Smith-Morra Gambit, then I'll show you the Alapin, and I'll show you where I force a transposition so that I only have to study one set of theory. So after d4, we take this pawn, and the Smith-Morra Gambit goes c3. Now, I personally do not want to take this pawn. I don't want to accept this gambit and get into some deep theoretical attack that they have prepared. No, thank you. So instead, I play knight f6. We attack this pawn, and the best move for white is to play e5. After e5, we play knight d5 and sear this position into your brain. Sear it into your brain. Is it there? Good. Take that mental image. Now, let's look at the Alapin. So after e4, we play c5, and white plays c3 here. Now, there are two moves that black plays. Black can play d5, and after d5, the pawn would take. We would take back with the queen, and the queen's placement on d5 isn't so bad because there's no knight c3. But the other move, and the most common one, is knight f6. After knight f6, white plays e5, we play knight d5, and the most common move is d4. We capture this pawn. Does this position look familiar? Let me switch back and forth here. You can see that the variations lead into the exact same position. So what this means is that when I play the Sicilian, whether or not my opponent plays the Alapin or the Smith-Morra, I am going to lead them down the same variation. This allows me to cut through the amount of theory that I have to study. It really cuts it in half. If you want to play the Alapin against me, or you want to play the Smith-Morra against me, and I got the black pieces, guess what? We're playing the Alapin. And we are playing the specific variation, the specific line that I know. And as early as move 4, I am already going to have that position in my head, and I know exactly what to do from there. So this cuts the amount of theory I have to study in half. This is a great tip that you can use. You can find different variations that transpose in whatever opening you play, and you can find a very efficient way to cut through the amount of theory that you have to study. If you like that second tip, I know I did. Personally, I loved it. Then please give this video a thumbs up and also consider subscribing. Now let's jump into our third and final tip, which is to nail down lines with common opening mistakes, specifically the mistakes that your opponents make. Let's be honest, if we're not masters, we are not going to be going down 10, 12 moves of theory perfectly. Someone's going to make a mistake. And early on, your opponent is probably going to make a mistake, so you want to focus on those lines so that you know exactly how to punish it. For example, we got the black pieces here, and let's look at the London. So d4, d5, bishop f4, we play knight f6, and after e3, we play c5. A lot of people, you'll see it's the second most common move, will play c3. I know that this is a mistake. This actually gives away white's advantage immediately, and I know exactly how to punish this. I even made a video specifically on how to punish this opening mistake, which is going to pop up, so check it out if you want to. But the idea here is that we want to focus in on very early and common opening mistakes that our opponent makes. So c3, this is move 4. White's already made a move that gives up the advantage that they had. So if we can focus in on these lines, we can learn how to punish our opponent immediately. Let's look at one more example here. We talked about the Sicilian a bunch, so you know what? Let's keep doing it, right? Let's inundate you guys with the Sicilian. I'm Italian if you can't tell. So after c5, let's look at the open Sicilian. So knight f3, I play d6. After d4, there's an exchange of pawns. Now I play knight f6, and after knight c3, I go with knight c6. I have seen this position in front of me so many times in my life. When I play the Sicilian, probably a good 75% of the games lead into this exact variation. So I know white's next moves pretty well, and you'll see that the fifth most common one for the master games is bishop e3. Against me, people play it a lot more frequently. It's probably the second or third most common, but you can see that black does really well against bishop e3. Bishop e3 is actually a mistake, and it gives up white's advantage. So you'll see the correct move here is knight g4. Black does very well in these lines. Let me know if you want me to make a video on this, because there are some very interesting variations here. But point being, this is a very common variation that pops up in my games, and you can see that black does very well if they know how to punish it. So this is the kind of thing that I look for when I study openings. This is the kind of variation that I specifically want to hone in on, because it's going to come up frequently, and if I know it well, I am going to be able to crush my opponents. I hope these tips are useful for you in improving the way that you study the openings. Personally, I use all three of them. I love them, and they've made me much more efficient at the way that I study the openings. Studying the opening is something that can be very tedious and at times just flat out boring and not fun. So these tips really gave me a little bit more purpose when I study. I know what I'm looking for. Specifically, I know that I want to hone in on my own weaknesses, I want to figure out what I'm doing wrong in my openings. I also want to look for opportunities for transpositions such that I can cut down the amount of theory I actually have to study. And finally, I want to look for common opening mistakes that my opponents are going to play. All three of these made me a lot more efficient, so I hope they do the same for you. I also made a playlist on all of my best videos on chess improvement that's going to pop up on the screen. Feel free to click on that, check out some other videos, and definitely save it because I'm going to be updating that constantly with new videos. You're definitely going to want to come back to that.